Hi there, my name's Visage, and I like to read horror stories, and I also like to create and write horror stories. I'm still getting the hang of all this on YouTube, but I just want to create and I just want to share. And if you have stories that you want to share, horror stories, short stories, then do share them with me, and I would love to read them out for you. The Cave. Steve and I had been talking about this trip for what felt like ages. Ever since we first heard the legend of the white grizzly bear, we've been obsessed. It wasn't just the rarity. Sightings were so infrequent that they bordered on myth. But the stories behind it, the strange way locals spoke of the bear, they'd always mentioned it, sure, never linger on the topic. There was a tension when they described its movements through the snow. It's not natural, one of the old hunters had said. Something wrong about it. You feel it in your bones like the cold's creeping inside you. A little dramatic. We didn't care. We weren't hunting the bear for sport. We were after something far more primal. The thrill. The glory of discovering what no one else dared to approach. As we ventured, the mountains rose like jagged teeth before us, snow swirling in thick, unrelented flurries. It was day 3, and our provisions were low, but Steve remained undeterred. His eyes were set, focused, and he had that look he always got when he was chasing something. Something he wouldn't let go until he had it. You still think it's out here? I asked, forcing a grin, but my nerves had begun to fray. The wind howled through the trees, the cold biting deeper than usual. The forest felt dead, too quiet, like it was holding its breath. It's out here, Steve said, pointing ahead. The tracks, they're fresh. I followed his finger to the indentations in the snow. Bear tracks, large and deep, weaving through the trees. We followed them for miles, a sense of isolation tightening with each step. The light was fading fast, the world around us dulling into shades of gray and white. Then we found a cave. It was carved into the side of a cliff, wide and gaping like a maw of some great beast. Jagged icicles hung from the entrance, and a deep, unnatural cold radiated from it within. The tracks led right to it, disappearing into the blackness beyond. This is it, Steve muttered, more to himself than to me. His breath misted in the cold air, hanging for a moment before dissipating. I hesitated. There was something about that cave, something ancient and wrong, like it was swallowing the light around it. But Steve was already moving forward, stepping inside without a second thought. I had no choice but to follow. The darkness inside was suffocating, our flashlights barely piercing the thick, damp air. The walls of the cave were smooth, too smooth, as if they had been worn down by not natural forces, but by something else, something with intent. And then the smell hit me, a sickly sweet odor of rot and decay, overwhelming in its intensity. It clung to everything, seeping into my skin, my lungs. I gagged, covering my mouth, but Steve pressed on, undeterred. We ventured deeper, the narrow passage twisted and turning in unnatural ways, always just barely wide enough for us to squeeze through. Every now and then, our flashlights would flicker, casting eerie shadows on the walls, making shapes that moved when we weren't looking. Then suddenly, the passage opened into a large chamber, and there, in the middle of the room, lay the bones. At first, I thought they were animal bones, bear, maybe. But as we drew closer, the shape became clearer. The bones were too thin, and the skulls, they were several, were unmistakably human, though twisted and warped. Some were missing jaws, others had deep gouges in their foreheads as if they'd been split open. Steve, I whispered, my throat tightening. We need to get out of here. But Steve wasn't listening. He knelt by one of the piles of bones, his flashlight steady in his hands as he inspected something, a large claw, impossibly sharp, still attached to a skeletal paw. It looked like it could have belonged to a bear, but the size was wrong. It was too large, too deformed. Jesus, Steve murmured, his voice barely audible over the growing wind howling through the cave. This is... He didn't finish his sentence. Instead, a low growl rumbled through the cave, the sound vibrating in my chest. We both froze, our flashlights flickering wildly as the air grew colder, unnaturally so. The growl came again, this time closer. Steve... But before I could finish, the lights went out. I heard Steve curse, fumbling with his flashlight in the darkness. Panic surged through me. I spun, shining my own beam around the room, but the light only caught glimpses of movement. Something large, moving impossibly fast through the shadows. Then, just as quickly as it had vanished, the light returned. I turned toward Steve, but he was gone. Steve? My voice cracked, echoing through the chamber. No answer, just the sound of the wind howling through the cave. Steve! I shouted, my breath wrecked, my heart pounding in my chest. I took a step forward, my flashlight shaking in my hand. Over here. I froze. Steve's voice, soft, faint, but unmistakable. It came from deeper within the cave, echoing off the walls, but something was wrong. His voice, it was distant, hollow, like someone was imitating him. Like something was stretching his words thin, twisting them. Steve? I called again, my throat tightening. I'm over here. Come on. The voice was wrong. It wasn't him. I took a step back, but the sound followed, this time closer. Don't leave me. I spun, shining my light in every direction, but there was no sign of Steve, only the bones, the cold, and ever-present growl reverberating through the cave. And then I saw it, something shifting in the shadows just on the edge of my flashlight's beam. It was tall, hunched, its body unnaturally thin, the elongated limbs that scraped the ground as it moved. Its eyes were black pits reflecting no light, and its mouth, oh God, its mouth was wide, impossibly wide, filled with rows of sharp, jagged teeth. It stepped forward, and I realized with a sickening jolt that it wasn't walking. It was crawling, its limbs twisted at odd angles, moving too fast, too smooth, and from its mouth, that horrible imitation of Steve's voice. Come closer. Don't be scared. I ran. I didn't look back. I sprinted through the cave, my breath coming in racked gasps, the thing's voice chasing me, growing louder, more desperate. Don't leave me. Come back. The cave twisted and turned, and I couldn't remember which way we had come. My flashlight flickered again, the beam growing weaker as I stumbled through the darkness. Behind me, the sound of claws scraping against stone grew louder, faster. It was close, too close. Then miraculously, I saw it, the faint outline of the cave's entrance. Daylight. With a final burst of energy, I hurled myself forward, crashing through the snow and onto the open air. I didn't stop running until the cave was far behind me, the sound of the creature's voice fading into the howling wind. I collapsed, gasping for air, the cold biting into my skin. My heart thundered in my chest as I stared back at the cave. Its dark mouth silent once more. Steve was gone, taken, and I knew deep down that whatever was in that cave It wasn't a bear. It was something far worse. And it was still waiting, waiting for the next fool to wander into its lair.